Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Heaven's Mouthpiece, and today I am reviewing a new book for you, recently recommended to me by a friend, called The Butcher and The Wren. It's by Alaina Urquhart. Sorry if I butchered that, Alaina. I'm not exactly sure how to say it, but she is a popular podcaster. She goes under the Morbid Podcast. I'm sure some of you have listened to it. Personally, I'm not a huge fan, but I'm not entirely into true crime like that. But I know tons of people love it. I was a bit apprehensive about reading this book at first, especially since I heard it was from the lady who does the Morbid Podcast, and I don't necessarily love their stuff. And this is also the first true crime I think I've ever actually read in my life, except for the one by Truman Capote, In Cold Blood, which barely counts. That was the first one. And Crime and Punishment, which also I say barely counts. So I am really out of date when it comes to true crime. And despite that, I actually took a little bit of liking to this story. I actually finished Butcher and the Wren in only 3 or so days. I can't remember the exact number, but it was way quicker than I've read a book in quite some time. Now, that's because of a couple different reasons. One, this is a generally pretty short book, if you can't tell right here. I think in total, let me check, it's only about 250 or so pages. Yeah, 241 pages total here in this book that I have. And that's not too many, especially when they're a little bit spaced out like this. And overall, it was a generally pretty easy and relaxing read. It wasn't too stressful with the sentence structure. I know if you've read something by like Dostoevsky, and maybe it's just me, but I have a hard time reading those just because he uses a language and sentence structures that are a bit beyond what I'm used to. As weird as it is to say that a true crime serial killer novel could be aimed towards younger people, I feel like the writing might have been for a younger audience here for this book. And something else that really kept me, chomping at the bit for more and wanting to know what happened was the cliffhangers were surprisingly good in this story. And they kept me really involved throughout the entirety. And that's why I finished it so quickly as well. Despite speeding through this book faster than I have any other book, except for another one which is coming soon for the review, in the past few months, that's really where my praise is going to end on this book. Sorry, Alaina, you almost had me for a second, but maybe in your next novel. I know this is her first book and everything, and everyone should give writing a shot if it makes them happy, and I'm not saying to stop, but this book barely held it together, and I think partially some of the reason that I did finish it and, have a positive view of it is because I finished it so quickly. And speaking of things that were murdered, butchered, however you want to call it, the three main victims of this novel were chiefly the setting, character development, and just overall plot. I'm not even from Louisiana, but I kind of know the first thing about water and how it interacts with land, and I feel like this is more of a generally known thing, but I guess if you live somewhere where you don't live near the water, it's kind of an issue. But throughout the book, we're in the bayou, and at the killer's home, it basically paces away from his house. They're stepping in water or when they step onto the ground, like water seeps out of it. And then they proceed to tell us he has a basement. He has a basement, but there's water basically right outside of his house. That's impossible. No one has a basement. If you do, that would just actually be ludicrous. So that was the first thing. I was like, all right, this doesn't make much sense. And I've been to New Orleans more than once before, and they acted like the whole city was just made up of these bayous, and any road that you take a turn off of that's not Bourbon Street is going to put you straight into a swamp with tons of alligator. And despite that first little thing, I think she did a good description of the swamps and, made them kind of eerie sounding, because I was a little bit afraid of, being in those dark swamps, and she made the ground seem really mushy and felt very real to me in that sense. But in basically every other location of the book, I felt like the setting was just pushed onto us rather than incorporated naturally through the writing, which is a little bit to do with the writing, but it also had to do with the setting not really being interactive with the characters, which is something that is very important for a higher level book from my ranking perspective. Setting aside, the character development here is weak. It is not great. And not even just the character development, the people that she chose, the archetypes and their backgrounds, just felt overall lazy. First off, our serial killer, Jeremy, and he's also called Cal at certain points, it flips on and off. He's your stereotypical serial killer. He killed animals when he was younger, and there was actually a decent amount of info on this in the book, and I feel like that's just a really low-hanging piece of fruit when it comes to serial killers. Like, come on. I want something new, something that, not everybody's heard of and not every single serial killer on the planet has done. And the next guy that we got going on this one is all lazy, but it does not miss. They have a detective, he smokes cigarettes, and he's extremely ominous the entire book. Love it or hate it, I think it works well in just about any setting, so she did well with that, but also, it's in every book, so, and I don't even read a lot of books, I just know that it's in every movie. Very common trope. And the last thing is the main character, Emily/Wren, whatever time period you want to call her in. She is the only really unique character throughout this book, but she's unique in not good ways. The decisions she makes and the way that she acts does not make any sense with her past and the things that have happened to her. For context, she was, almost murdered by this guy, and later on in the book is just kind of nonchalantly cruising around like serial killers in the area that she's in are, commonplace, and she's not that worried about them when they never even caught this guy in the first place. Like, of course she'd be scared to death day to day. She'd probably be locking down her house like her life depends on it, but apparently her windows are open. I really felt like she could have done a better job on the characters. Big miss on that. And just once again, on the main character, Emily/Wren, whatever you want to call her, even her husband doesn't even seem to have much context. He's like encouraging her to go out at the beginning of the book when she's like, a little bit apprehensive about going out with her friends, but not because she's scared of, being outside. It's more she's just like tired from work. And he's like, you gotta go out there. You gotta get back out in the world. And like, it seems like he has no idea that his wife was basically almost murdered, like within 50 square miles of where their house is. So, I feel like he'd be a little bit more on the ball on that. While I was reading the book, I kind of thought about this the least, some of these plot holes, and this was because I was absolutely blazing through it. And when they did come up, I was like, just forget about it. Let's keep reading this book. And, it was kind of an enjoyable experience, so I don't regret doing that. But now I'm going to vent a little bit about the things that really pissed me off in this book. So first off, the most important thing for me personally in this book was when she finally escaped from this guy's house. And granted, when she escapes from his house, she runs with a basically broken back. He must have stabbed her at least somewhere in her spine for when she got away. So, in short, how she got away was he was being crazy serial killer, stabbed her, and like her vertebrae was gonna hopefully like sever it so she couldn't walk, and like she just dies there all night. But instead, he missed the vertebrae. Horrible medical student, by the way, and he's in medical school. And she goes and gets this other girl's body and throws it on the electric fence, which then stops the current, and she's able to run through the bayou out to, whatever road. And this road, she doesn't say how far it is, but she knows that she's running, and she's running forever and forever, and she barely remembers the whole thing. But there's no way she could have ran more than 30, 50 miles away to this place. That would probably take multiple days for her to do, and by the time that she got away, she gets to a main road, the police find her, and believe nothing that she says after she has stab wounds, and she supposedly can't tell them where it is, but there's no way that she got that far away. Like, say it was even 50 square miles, and it's all bayou and stuff. Who are the property owners in these areas? Why, there can't be more than like 10 of them if it's really that sparse of land, and why can't they go investigate these properties? That made no sense to me, and they just refused to believe her because God knows what reason, and they never found him. So probably the worst police department in the entire world at this place. But let's move on to my next qualm. This one's a little bit earlier on, and you don't necessarily have all the details you need to be mad at this one yet when you read it, but she finds her card at a scene where he dumped the body, and it's not concerning at all to her that, you know, she found her own medical card that is from her office, to then be like, oh, you know, they do that all the time, and she's not worried about it. She doesn't have security detail in her house, nothing, and she doesn't really give much context for why she is scared or not scared about it. It's just like, oh, that happened. And, you know, that really just serves later on in the book, the twist when they eventually find that she is the girl from the prior part of the book, and when the time lapse happens. And it's just really stupid that they even included that in the book. They should have at least started giving hints at that point to, like, oh, I was once hunted by someone in this same area and was almost killed. Maybe this could be the same person. But I guess not. I also found it incredibly strange that the killer Jeremy, when he's finally in grasp of, you know, being able to do everything he's ever wanted to do and, like, finally catch Emily again, who's Wren, and he's inside of their house, that he just decides to take a random ring from her, and he's like, oh, I really got her now, like, this is gonna freak her out. And then the next day when the ring is gone, I don't even remember them mentioning it, and when she finds it, it's really not that big of a deal either. So what was the whole point of that? Why didn't he just kill her? I mean, I see that they're angling this for another sequel because he gets away miraculously. That's also a whole nother story, but, you know, that's kind of possible what actually happened. But, you know, I guess she's pretty good at doing the cliffhangers, and, like, I want to see what happens, but not even for the sake of I think something good is going to happen. It's pretty similar to that other book that I reviewed a little bit ago called The Vor. Tons of stuff goes on in that book, but nothing that you want to know what happens, but for no other reason than the author just kind of leaves you some crap that you don't know about. Last but not least, my biggest qualm with this entire plot, and it's really not that big of a deal, but he surveys their entire house, and he's able to find that on the basement there's like a painted in window, and it's not locked like the rest of their windows are, and he's able to get through there. But he knows that on their basement door that there is no lock on it. And I have never been to a house where you could see the basement door from outside. And also, I mean, maybe he could have done enough surveillance, but it would have just been nice to include that he could see the basement door through a window. That's all I needed. Not really that big of a thing, but for some reason that irked me. If you're a serious true crime reader or serial killer fiction novelist, someone who is really, really into that stuff, or maybe even a little bit into this sort of genre, then you're going to have to do some serious mental gymnastics to enjoy this book. And being able to sit back and read through it slowly, it would be very, very difficult to not want to put this thing down after maybe even like 40 or so pages. But for somebody like me who was just able to blast through it and kind of nonchalantly get past all those tiny details which might really bother some of the more dedicated readers to the true crime area, you know, it's pretty good. It wasn't that bad. All in all, I didn't really love this book, and I'm gonna end up giving it a 3 out of 10 stars. And this is one of those things that, you know, maybe in elementary, like, or maybe a middle school teacher would have their class read or have on like their bookshelf because they listen to the Morbid podcast and someone just happens upon it. And that's really the kind of reader that you're looking for this sort of thing. A little bit earlier of a reader, so that doesn't want something that's like super gruesome or also super intensive on the writing side. But ultimately, I think this book is just going to be one of those that you see outside of the library in about 10, 20 years that's for like 25 cents that nobody's going to buy, but they had to sell because nobody's checking it out and it just takes up space. Nonetheless, I am somewhat excited to see if she comes out with anything new, because I felt like a lot of these errors were smaller ones that she could fix rather easily. And I'm not going to go out of my way to try and find and read something like this, but if someone tells me it's good, shoot me like a message or something, or just comment on this video again and say like, hey, she dropped a new book, it was pretty good, you should check it out, because I'll do it then. If not, I will catch you guys next time. Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to hit that like button and also subscribe. It's only like 2% of you guys have subscribed to me. Not that I'm expecting a lot of people to subscribe, but I really do appreciate it, and I will be making some more videos coming up shortly. I'll see you soon.